Imagine waking up one day and floating into the ceiling instead of the floor. Sounds fun, right? But what happens when gravity stops pulling us down? It was just a regular Monday. Birds were chirping, the sun was rising, and the world seemed as ordinary as ever. But when Sam opened his eyes that morning, something felt different. Very different. Instead of his usual morning routine of groggily climbing out of bed, he felt his body being pulled upward. With a gasp, he realized his head was gently bumping against the ceiling. "What on earth?" he mumbled, rubbing his eyes in disbelief. He reached out for his bed, but it was no use. He was floating. As Sam struggled to understand what was happening, he heard a loud crash from the kitchen. His mother's voice echoed, calling out, "Sam! Are you okay?" She sounded scared. "Yes, Mom, but why are we floating?" Sam shouted back. He looked around his room and saw his alarm clock, books, and even his soccer ball drifting toward the ceiling. He grabbed onto his dresser to steady himself, but everything in his room was slowly moving upward. "Sam!" His mom's voice came again, this time with more urgency. She'd managed to hold onto the kitchen counter, but the fruits in the fruit bowl were already hovering above her head, one by one joining the floating madness. Sam pushed himself off the wall, awkwardly drifting down the hallway, bumping into walls and door frames. When he reached the kitchen, he found his mother holding onto the counter with one hand while reaching for the fridge door with the other, trying to keep herself from drifting up to the ceiling. "I don't know what's happening, Sam," she said, wide-eyed, "but it seems like gravity. Reversed?" It wasn't just their house. Outside, they could hear car alarms blaring, dogs barking, and people shouting in confusion. Sam and his mom peeked out the window to see their neighbors in all sorts of strange positions, some clinging to trees, some grasping onto fence posts, and others holding onto anything they could find. Birds, once gracefully flying across the sky, now struggled, spiraling toward the clouds as they fought against the upward pull. Sam and his mom had no choice but to go outside. Holding onto the front door frame, they carefully stepped out, only to see a scene that looked like a science fiction movie. Cars had drifted off the roads, stuck on rooftops, or hanging by their tires from telephone poles. Children, who usually rode bikes down the street, were now holding onto the handlebars for dear life as their bikes drifted upward like balloons. "Mom," Sam whispered, "what if this doesn't stop? What if we float away?" His mom gave him a reassuring squeeze. "We'll figure this out, Sam. Let's stay calm and find a solution." News soon spread across every phone, TV, and radio station. Scientists baffled as gravity reverses across the world. Experts around the globe were scrambling for answers. For the first time, people everywhere united with a single question: how do we stay grounded? Over the next few days, people had to get creative. A few families in the neighborhood found rope and began tying themselves to heavy objects like furniture or big trees. Mr. Lewis, the friendly gardener down the street, turned his shed into a gravity-proof zone, filling it with bags of soil and cement, creating weight to keep him on the ground. Sam and his mom decided to secure their home too. They piled bags of rice and flour in each room, weighing down furniture and tying themselves to sturdy hooks in the walls whenever they went to sleep. Schools were canceled, so kids like Sam were home all day practicing the floating crawl as they learned to navigate the upside-down world. After a week, communities came together to create safer spaces. Gymnasiums and schools became gravity stations where people could attach themselves to harnesses and ropes anchored to the floor. In the evenings, families gathered in these stations, sharing stories and laughing about their floating misadventures. Surprisingly, there was a sense of togetherness that wasn't there before, and people were closer than ever. But life wasn't without danger. One evening, Sam heard a scream from outside. He rushed to the window to see that Mr. Jenkins, their elderly neighbor, had lost his grip and was now drifting above his roof. Panic swept through the street as everyone tried to help. Sam, without thinking, grabbed a rope and tied it to his waist. With his mother's help, he carefully drifted up to Mr. Jenkins, reaching out as far as he could. Just as Mr. Jenkins was about to float beyond reach, Sam managed to grab his hand, pulling him to safety. The neighbors cheered, and Mr. Jenkins, grateful and shaken, hugged Sam tightly. Days turned into weeks, and people learned new ways of living with reversed gravity. Artists began painting upside-down murals. Engineers developed hover shoes that kept people anchored to the ground, and inventors created weighted backpacks to help children walk around more easily. People adapted in ways they'd never imagined.
Then one day, as suddenly as it had started, gravity returned to normal. It was a quiet morning, and Sam was having breakfast with his mom when they felt a strange pull downward. His mom looked at him, and they both instinctively reached out to grab the table. Everything settled back in place, as if nothing had happened. Outside, the neighborhood was in a mix of joy and chaos. People cheered, hugging and laughing, thrilled to be back on solid ground. Kids ran around the streets for the first time in weeks, ecstatic to feel the earth beneath their feet. But even though life returned to normal, people were forever changed by that strange experience. Families had grown closer, communities had found new ways to support each other, and everyone had learned to look at life a little differently. Sam, for one, would never take gravity or his neighbors for granted again. Sometimes, life turns everything upside down, and it's in those moments we find out what truly matters. So, next time you look up at the sky, remember that ordinary things like gravity are sometimes the most extraordinary gifts we have.